Alright, so adding on to last class we kind of introduced ourselves to, well, the circulatory system. So I'm going to have three lessons for most of the system, maybe four for digestive because it's a little complicated, but we're going to have three majority, and this is going to be talking about some more details and a little bit this and that of circulatory system, obviously. So let's start. Mm, First, I want to talk about this is the absolute best heart diagram that I want you guys to go ahead and look at it. And not only look at it, I want you guys memorize. So it has many things that we don't really use. Like it tells us exactly which artery these ones are on the aorta, which we don't need to know. But it's good to know. So this picture, I'm gonna tell you exactly what you need to remember and exactly what you don't need to know all of the names for these. You just need to know they're part of the aorta. You need to know these, the superior vena cava, the pulmonary arteries, pulmonary veins, right atrium. And then you want to talk about the valves. So the valves is really something I want to talk about. Is because last class I didn't go in too detail of the valves. So these valves, we have the atrioventricular valve, also known as the tricuspid valve. So that is basically if you can't see, it's the atrium to the ventricle. Like hence its name, atrioventricular valve. So on the right atrium we have the tricuspid valve, and on the left atrium we have the mitral valve. So both names are directly to the same thing, except for the fact that they're just different names. So I want you to guys keep in mind that if you whichever one you use on the test or the exam or whatever quiz that comes up, they're both valid. So now I also want to talk about the semilunar valves. These are basically whether it's the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries or it's the left ventricle to the aorta. So these are another valve that will control blood flow, just like any other valves, and that is pretty much all of the heart. So I might just give you this random heart diagram and then on the test, and then I'm asking you to give me all of this part, just like all the science classes you did before. So that is likely how you're gonna be tested on this, and then septum, all of that, this should be fine. And then I also want to talk about blood, because we're on the circulatory system. And I mean, honestly, the circulatory system is mainly about two things: it's the heart and the blood. The heart is sending the blood everywhere so that we're technically alive, and the blood is, the actual blood that we're keeping us alive. So blood, we actually have different type of blood. So we have the red blood cells, which come from the red bone marrow, and male actually have more red blood cells than female, and well, it has many reasons. So most typical reasons is that well, male is physically a lot bigger than female. So technically, your circulatory tract, it's a lot larger. So so that is kind of the big idea, and that is exactly why most people say, hey, look, men are stronger than women and men are better than sports than women. That's because you have a higher amount of red blood cells that carry carbon dioxide as waste, and it also gives you more oxygen. So it's a physical advantage. It's not something like, oh no, you're not stronger. It's not something like that. So, and another thing that comes in influence too, well, particularly red blood cells amount, it's sex hormones. So male, we have testosterone. So testosterone stimulate the production of, well, another hormone, otherwise, which is also known as the erythropoietin, which is a hormone that promotes RBC production in bone marrow. So that's why male essentially have more. However, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's not too much sports or stuff that requires you to have a large amount of red blood cells. And then the relative size is pretty much small, 8 ohm diameter, and the main function is to carry oxygen and obviously carbon dioxide as waste from cells. So it's delivering to the cells and it's carrying the waste away from the cells. So the typical lifespan of a red blood cell is actually around 120 days, and hey, these are experiences. So you, I want you to remember something. So when we talk about, well, the red blood cells, they're actually broken down into hemoglobin, which is one of the components that makes up red blood cells. So each hemoglobin binds well exactly four oxygen molecules. And then a red blood cell can carry around 1.12 billion molecules of oxygen. So these are numbers that really matter, and you have to remember them. Now, well, we have the different white blood cells. So we have the granulocytes, and then we have the angiocytes, or the angranulocytes. So first, um let's talk about their origin. So red bone marrow and thymus. So you might ask, hey, what is difference between red bone marrow and just regular bone marrow, or yellow bone marrow? So red bone marrow is actually a specific type of bone marrow that is only responsible for producing blood cells. And yellow bone marrow on the other side, it produces it mainly stores fat. That's what it does. So red bone marrow is like this specified thing. So like it's mainly located in the pelvis, scapula, skull, and other places. It's at the ends of long bones. And then to know where thymus is, you kind of have to learn a little bit about anatomy. So thymus is actually a really small gland. It produces T lymphocytes, T cells, which are white blood cells that play a crucial role in our case. So I also want to, before we get into the amount that we have in our body, I want to talk about the differences between these two different type of white blood cells. So there's not too big of a difference. Mainly is how you look at them by their cytoplasm. So in a regular granulocytes, it has a presence of granules in their cytoplasm. So like little particles flowing around in their cytoplasm, making them look a little fuzzy. But in granulocytes, it doesn't have anything. It's a clear cytoplasm, just like pretty much anything else. So we have around 6,000 granulocytes around our body and 2,000 angranulocytes. So we will barely really get into the details of this, and we barely kind of try to understand stuff like that. So there's difference, but we don't really go through that. We just know all you need to remember is red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. But okay, so lifespan of white blood cells are rather short compared to red blood cells. They're only a few hours to a few days. And then we can also see right here. So we gave you a few examples because they're just classifications. These are still classifications. So as you can see, they have small particles within their cytoplasm that makes them look a little fuzzy and ugly, while these ones are just clear, like a regular cell. Now, platelets come from red bone marrows and lungs. We have 250K of them. And so they're the smallest. They're really, really small. And they play a crucial role well, in clotting blood. And I just wanted to also talk about this. So, engulfing foreign particles and basically, defending, it's a little different. So, engulfing is when you're actually killing the foreign particles. Well, the defense is like, hey, how do I stop this bacteria from entering, my bloodline or stuff like that. So these are kind of different. And this one is basically clotting. So whenever you have a cut and you're like, oh, wait a minute, why my blood doesn't stop? Oh, and suddenly platelets get in. Hey, look, my blood stopped. And then that's pretty much platelets. They're very small, and as you can see right here, very small. So these are consumption items. I want you guys to understand. We regenerate them, but they're a consumption item. If I just got into not me, sorry. If somebody just got into a car crash, they're gonna lose a lot of red blood cells. They're gonna lose a lot of platelets, and they're gonna lose a lot of white blood cells. So at that time, their present amount within their body is gonna have a lot less than these. Also remember that these are cells present per millimeter cubed of blood approximation. So because we really can't be like we can't see these particles. They're really small. So we have to get a microscope, and still we don't have much of them. So now I also want to talk about the different blood vessel, the type, the blood vessel type that carries different blood. So usually we have blood around our body. So wall thickness is one big thing that we use to classify these. So first we want to talk about the thickest is arteries. And then arteries are these blood vessels that carries blood away from the heart. So you're pretty thick because you gotta give every part of your body some blood. You have to be thick. You have to be strong so that your entire blood chain doesn't break. It's round. It's silent, and its flow direction goes away from the heart. So its pressure it's the highest. It's 80 to 120 millimeter per gram. And the O2 concentration is pretty high. This is because, remember, it's delivering blood away from the cell, or sorry, away from the heart. So whenever we have blood from the heart and we're distributing it, that's oxygenated blood. So its oxygen level is really high. And then because we're only delivering the blood to the heart, we're not carrying it back. So we have a pretty low carbon dioxide concentration simply because we don't take much of that. We don't take the waste. There's no diffusion that happens here. And the special features is that it has an elastic recoil, and it has no valves at all. And then capillaries are basically when the small vessels that connect the arteries to the actual cell. So for example, if I have a feet cell and then I have these arteries that come from my heart to deliver the blood to my feet cell. But essentially, when it gets super close, it can't reach anymore. Remember, this was pretty thick. So we need to get some thin stuff. So we get the thin capillaries that goes in there and deliver the blood. It's microscopic, it's web-like, and it has exchange networks. Because first it will carry the cell. It will take the blood from the arteries into the cell, and then it will connect you to the veins that will carry it back. But that's later. So the pressure is rather low because it's not carrying too far. And then the O2 is decreasing because essentially we're going to be giving the blood that we have from the arteries. So essentially we had a high O2 concentration, but then we started to give it to the cell, so it starts to decrease, and then CO2 concentration. This is because the cell is using that O2 to produce CO2 because they're producing cellular respiration. So we're taking that, and then this has extensive diffusion, which is gas and nutrients, because the cells actually need to use it. The special features is it has huge surface area, and it have this thing called parasites in capillaries. It's this little so parasites is like this membrane that wraps around capillaries. It plays a crucial role in regulating blood flow because it kind of maintain the structure of capillaries. So that is basically what protects our brain from being draughted in blood. So as long as we have this membrane around here, we won't get blood into our brain. However, if we don't, that might be a different story. Veins are these vessels that carry blood towards the heart. So if I have blood from the heart, it's gonna go through the arteries, and it's gonna go into the capillaries, which is gonna go into the cell, and then the cell is gonna spit it out to the capillaries once again, and the capillaries is gonna go ahead and give it to the veins. Alright, pretty easy. So the wall thickness is middle, is kind of between the two, and it's flat, collapsible towards the heart. It has the lowest pressure, and its O2 concentration is rather low, explained before. And then its CO2 concentration is pretty high because it's carrying the waste from to the heart, and then it has minimal diffusion. But however, one so special thing about valves is that it has valves. So you might go ahead and think about it. Hey, wait a minute. I'm carrying blood towards the heart. So if you talk about brains and you talk about brain and everything that's above your heart, you're like, it's okay. Yeah, it's just regular blood flow, right? It's gravity. But then when you're talking about your feet or your hip or your toes or whatever, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, I'm going against gravity here. So you're actually having this valve so that when the blood push up, it won't drop down. So you have this little valve that it keeps close. So whenever you flow upward, it's gonna be open. However, when you started to flow downward, it's gonna close. So that is how you kind of push blood against gravity. Direction of heart blood flow. So the heart is like this main system, and then it's so important, I guess. So heart is gonna give blood to large arteries, which is gonna give blood to smaller arteries, and then the very very small arteries are called arterioles. So arterioles is gonna pass it on to capillaries, and which capillaries is gonna pass on to the cell, and the cell is gonna pass it back to the capillaries, which is gonna pass to super small veins called venules, which is gonna pass to a little bigger veins, which is smaller veins in our case, and then the super large veins that will carry it finally back to the heart into the atrium. So I also want to talk about how kind of the heart beat. You know, when we were talking about I guess we're talking about heart beating us and what happens with the valve, but there's also some neurons and neuroscience that comes into play. So in our case, we have a bunch of neuron networks spread around our heart. So then now these nodes they will fire to the valves. So essentially, it will cause, for example, if I have this node. So let's say if I have the SA node, this sinoatrial node is gonna go ahead and fire. Boom! I'm gonna fire. So now the atrioventricular opens or whatever. So the atrium is gonna pump. It's gonna open the valve, and then the AV node is gonna pump, and then boom, the ventricle it kind of compresses and gives all the blood everywhere, and then this entire network is called bundle of His, and that is pretty much it. So you just gotta know they're gonna fire, and after they fire, you're gonna be able to have a response and be like, hey, now my heart is beating, right? And let's see what else. Yeah, I believe that is all I wanted to talk about, right? Yeah, so I have another thing, it's blood pressure. Ugh, every time, every year, blood pressure always sucks. So, blood pressure is this kind of thing where we measure how healthy our blood is. So, this is the pressure experienced by the arteries when the ventricle contracts and pumps the blood around the body. So, the pumping of the heart allows blood to flow to every single part around the body. For this to occur, pressure is generated due to concentration of the atria and the ventricles. Both the atria contract together and empty blood into the ventricles, and then the ventricles go ahead and contract simultaneously, so that the blood actually flows through the arteries and go into different parts of the body. So this part we already learned. And so when the ventricle contracts, the blood pressure is very high. And then because we actually need it to be very high because we're giving blood to a lot of places. So the blood pressure it's called the systolic blood pressure. So this is a top numbers, which is when when the ventricle just contracts and just pumped. And then when the ventricles relax, so all the blood is gone, the ventricles started to relax. The blood pressure is relatively low because we don't have anything that happens right now. So this is called the diastolic pressure. That's why you have two numbers that gives out when you're measuring it on like a machine, a shoppers or something. Usually it's supposed. So for a healthy guy, it's 120/80 for a healthy guy, a healthy adult. So we were talking about this. So you can go. So the stethoscope and the spiral ganometer are used to measure these, and then blah 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 blah. So you can read this on your own. I don't really care about it. Really, you don't have to know too much about the machine. I don't even expect you to memorize how to spell these words. So that's pretty much it. And then I want to introduce you to one of these electrocardiograms. So on the TV you have you have these people in a hospital. You have like you have this old guy. he's very old. He's on the machine, on the heart machine, and you have this electrocardiogram. It's like it's running, and suddenly it turns to a straight line, and then everybody's like, oh look, he's dead. But now today I'm gonna explain what every single part of this is. So this is the electrocardiogram. So this what does this do? It basically senses the electric flow and the electron flow around your heart, and that's basically that's basically corresponding to the neurons. When they fire, there's going to be a change in electronegativity. So at the P wave, this is basically the node firing. So atrial depolarizes. So the atria gets ready to contract. So there's a little signal. And then the PR, this is where we rest for a little bit. So we rest for a little bit, but just a little bit. This is when the electrical impulses have to travel from the atria to the ventricles via the atrioventricular node. So now, right after the AV node gets the signal, they're like, okay, let's go. So in this process, ventricle quickly depolarizes, and right after that, we're gonna fire. So the ventricle is gonna go ahead and pump the blood, contract and pump the blood to everywhere around your body during this QRS complex. However, at the same time, remember, what happened here? So our atrium fired a little bit, fired here. However, atrium needs to relax and prepare itself to fire again. So the atrium actually has repolarization here. But because the ventricle is too strong, so it covered everything here. So this is basically atrium repolarization and ventricle contraction here. And then at the end, you have it kind of resting a little bit, so the ventricle starts to take a little break. So this is a ST segment. So the ventricles is fully depolarized and no electroactivity is happening. And then we have the T wave. So this is when the ventricle repolarizes. So it gets ready, it signals. So the signal has already been sent to the ventricles to, hey, let's chill and relax and prepare for the next fire. So this process repeats fast and fast and fast. Remember, this process repeats in less than seconds. You're beating a lot every second, and sometimes when you work out, you do sports really fast, your heart's racing 130 or even higher, and that's what happens. And then basically, I just want you one more time: atrial contraction, atrium repolarization, ventricle contraction here, and ventricle rests and repolarizes right here. So this is the last place. So here is a full gizmo. This gizmo is very important, and this is our second lesson. There has a lot of details. It's 22 minutes or even longer. A lot of details. Please do this gizmo. This gizmo tells you a lot. Please do it. I will link this in the description for the YouTube kids. So please, guys. Next class, we're going to talk about diseases of what can possibly happen to the circulatory system, and that is pretty much it.